Hello, everybody. Welcome to this video. I'm going to be talking about psychopathy, also a little bit about micro horror or horror stories. We'll get into the Conjuring, analyze the last movie, and hyperbole. So uh, let's start with psychopathy because I think I've never touched on this subject. I've always felt like it's one of those topics that is very morbid. A lot of people like these type of topics. They like them like they like or I would say it's similar to how people like um for example, watching crime documentaries or serial killer movies or documentaries, like these type of things that are kind of interesting, fun. um, but I want to look at it more from the lens of like from like a study, right? Not really investigation, but more formally structured, not so much in terms of the populace or in terms of well, talking about maybe things that are just so vulgar or things that people will want to talk about just because they're interesting, right? But without any serious or formal structure to it. So the thing on psychopathy I was checking out, I think we all know the dark triad, right? Which is kind of like Machiavellian, manipulation, a little bit of like other aspects in it. But I was watching this interview with Jordan Peterson, and he was speaking on Robert Hare and how Robert Hare had this like he was investigating prisoners who were potential psychopaths. And it was interesting because at first he was listening to them and he would video record the interview. Um, and after the video or after the interview, he would watch the video. Robert O'Hare, who was a psychologist, would watch the video, and then he would find out that the psychopaths or the criminal psychopaths had actually fooled him, had tricked him. Um, how did they trick him? I think one easy way of detecting that a psychopath has tricked you is when you believe that they're nice people, right? Or when you believe that they actually, that what they did was like, that was not that bad or was kind of justified, or you kind of understand their logic, right? Because one of the characteristics of psychopaths is that they lie, right? And I think they work logic because they're able to use logic. And, you know, people being logical and emotional will get confused and will, you know, maybe interpret things that are happening or that the psychopath is saying like from an emotional lens, and will be understanding and sympathetic and tolerant and will demonstrate empathy. But they can't, for example, that's one of the characteristics of psychopaths, that they can't really, they have low empathy, and for that matter they have low emotion, so to say. So Robert Hare has a a psychopathy checklist revised. It's on PDF on Google, you can look it up. And I took this test. I got 12, but this test is, it's a list of like 20 statements or 20 questions, and you have to choose between 1, 2, and 3. And you know, at the end, I was able to add up all of the results, and I got like a 12. So the standard is you can get, I think, um, if you get above 25 in European countries or above 30, basically you can be potentially diagnosed with or as a psychopath. So I got a 12, so I guess I'm not there. But I did this test on my own. I guess like a professional is supposed to do it, right? And they're supposed to take like the test along with other things like an interview. I think it's like a 2-hour interview. And I would also argue that the way in which the interview is conducted and the test is conducted, this checklist is conducted, also has to be controlled, right? It's not just like I'm just gonna pick 1, 2, or 3. But anyway, you can check it out, go do it. And this is sort of to say that, you know, Jordan Peterson talks about a lot about this, and I feel like it's necessary to talk about it when people are idealists right? So let's think about communism, socialism, changing the future, changing the present, right? Like all of these social movements, social causes, all of them are noble in essence, right? And they start off as noble. But the thing about psychopaths or evil for that matter, or bad people, is that they tend to corrupt other people, right? And they tend to eventually corrupt groups. So the problem there is watching out for these people, or at least having sense or having some type of general idea that they exist, and watching out for them, right? So this is to say, you shouldn't be paranoid, but you also shouldn't be completely trustworthy of everybody, right? And of their intentions or of what they do, and the causes or the impact that they have on the group, on people, right? So we were talking this weekend about these social movements, and how some of them eventually get corrupted. And we were talking about power, very interestingly enough. And the idea here was, and it's a part of the broader schema of things, but inclusion, when you include someone, right, you exclude the group or you exclude the rest, right? So how do you include without excluding, was basically the idea in education and so in society and politics and in all these domains. And interestingly enough, we talked about how when you have a group, inevitably it becomes a matter of power, right? And power eventually corrupts. Now, it doesn't always corrupt, but it has the potential to corrupt, right? To then only when I think when you like identify, or when you kind of set your ways into all of these characteristics that make you and your group up, you become like part of the problem of exclusion, right? So that's kind of where that problem comes in. And also, of course, harming other people or not caring about other people, and using a movement or using your power, your group, your ideology, to only benefit yourself, even at the cost of other people, right? So yeah, just kind of like a red flag, to, or not even a red flag, we can call it like a yellow flag of like, hey, just watch out for this. um Another interesting topic here is, or an interesting question is, do psychopaths have theory of mind? Also very interesting. Theory of mind is the idea that is developed, or it's the mental ability of thinking about other people, or thinking how other people perceive you. It's kind of related also, we can say, with metacognition, because you can think about what you're thinking. And this allows for empathy, for example, for sympathy, for tolerance, for lending a hand to other people, right? Excuse me. Now, the interesting question is that then, do psychopaths have this ability? And you can kind of use your intuition and say, well, yeah, of course they need to have it. Otherwise, how are they going to be able to manipulate people, right? What psychopaths don't have, they have all of the mental capacities. Some even say they actually feel emotion, but the emotion that they feel is not oriented towards other people. It's not putting themselves in other people's shoes. It's just them, right? So the anger they feel, or the resentment they feel, or things like that, have to do with them. Now, I'm not an expert on psychopathy. I never actually studied, topics related to pathology or psychopathy, but I just recently started kind of like digging into it. Um, and I'm going to talk about two different sets of concepts that they talk about when relating when related to psychopathy. But just to finish off the idea of, do psychopaths have theory of mind? Yes, they do, because it is mental. It's a mental capacity. But they don't have the emotional aspect of the theory of mind, right? Because theory of mind ultimately allows you to interact successfully with other people, right? It helps you to establish long term, lifelong relationships with other people, um, emotionally. And psychopaths don't have this really, so it doesn't affect them emotionally. Like if a psychopath is listening to someone, I could say maybe they can fake crying or appearing like they are emotional about it, but internally, really, they're not feeling that, right? So the two groups, to get kind of into this idea of the two groups or the two sets of ideas that are in psychopathy, the first one is interpersonal, and the second one is lifestyle orientation. The interpersonal has a couple of them, has a handful of characteristics. First, superficial charm, grandiose sense of self, pathological lying, manipulativeness, lack of remorse or guilt, shallow emotions, and lack of empathy. Now, you could say, well, I know my friend who's a pathological liar, so he's a psychopath. And no, right? The criteria, like me with the checklist, I got 12 out of, I think you can get, what, 60, right? So you could say, oh, you have some psychopathic traits or characteristics. It's like, no, you we obviously all have a little bit of something, right? But that doesn't mean we fall under the absolute category, right? Because you need to meet the criteria. So what's interesting here is that all of this combined kind of allows you to have a type of like American Psycho from, or a Norman Bates. So you're able to pull off this mask, right? Which appears to be like normal, genuine, emotional, affectionate, but underneath the surface, you're really, that's not really your intention. You have other intentions, or, you're manipulating people emotionally, right? So this is the interpersonal aspect of it. And the lifestyle aspect of it is impulsivity, need for stimulation, parasitic lifestyle, poor behavioral control, and early behavioral problems. Now, this need for stimulation, for example, I kind of have it because I think a lot of people have it. You get bored easily, right? That's basically the problem there. But again, this is one of many traits, right, that you have to consider. A parasitic lifestyle is also interesting, right? So you live off others, right? It's like me, and you don't really give anything back in return. And early behavioral problems would be like when, since you were a kid, you've had these behavioral problems, right? Or you've had these problems at school with other people, right? So that starts off early on in life. What Robert Hare was doing, since he said, which is kind of interesting, um, I'm paraphrasing, but his idea was like, you can't really tell who is a psychopath logically, because logically they're going to be able to one up you, or they're going to be able to match you. So what you need to do is actually look in the emotional aspect of things, right? They're going to lack guilt, they're going to lack remorse, they're going to lack empathy, right? And genuinely, because again, that can be faked. I can fake guilt, right? I can fake remorse, I can fake empathy, but that doesn't mean I have it or I show it. Which, again, if we kind of dig into the neurosciences, and maybe that has a lot to do with the chemistry of your brain, that's that could be a cause for that. So we could even say it's not really like psychopaths' faults, or fault that they are born like that, right? Because they're, it's genetics, maybe it's the family's genes or whatever. um, but yeah, the main idea to take away from all this is that psychopaths could trick you into thinking they are nice people, right? And the problem here again is not to be paranoid, but to know when someone is being bad, right, or evil, basically. So just watching out for that. Now, getting into, this, I'm thinking all of these topics have like a Halloween theme to it, and it's March, but um, now we're gonna get into the micro horror, which is, these are topics that I've just recently like gotten into this week, right? And I've kind of investigated, and I thought I'd do like a little summary of it. So many years ago, I was, online, and I started coming across like these short stories that were basically horror or terror or supernatural stories, scary stories. Um, but they were short. So what I liked is the short format, right? Which was like no longer than a paragraph, like just two or three sentences. And that scary story was compacted in those two or three sentences. So I just recently thought of that and or remember that, and I was like investigating it because I remember this story in particular, which was some. I think I even like paraphrased it or I told it in a different way. It's a daughter. There's a child playing on the roof or something like that with her doll, and what happens is that, see, I'm kind of forgetting the other version of it, but the original version goes, she's playing on the roof with her doll, and she hears her mother calling from inside the house, and the mother says, "Come in, honey, food's ready," or whatever. So she goes, okay, coming. So she gets her doll, and as soon as she's about to run in back into the house or whatever, her mother pulls her from her arm and says, Don't go. I heard that too," right? And it's, you're like, so who's the mother, right? That's kind of like the scary thing. The version I told was kind of like, there's a child playing on the roof with her doll, and um I think it went, she hears her mother calling, um no, I don't remember, but it was, I think it was backwards, like her mother is not with her, and she, I don't know, but it was a different version. I told it a little while ago, but anyway, these are called micro horror or two sentence horror. Here goes the one I just told, and I'm going to be reading a couple of them because I think they're kind of fun. My daughter won't stop crying and screaming in the middle of the night. I visit her grave and ask her to stop, but it doesn't help. Right, so that's kind of scary because her daughter is buried, I guess. This one too, and there's like some popular ones out there. This one says, "My daughter said, 'Daddy, check for monsters under my bed.' I looked underneath and saw her there, trembling. 'Daddy, there's someone on my bed,'" right? And it's like, oh crap, now, you know. So a lot of these deal with perception, right? With who's who, um, which I was investigating with ChatGPT. There's another one here. I smiled at my reflection in the mirror. It didn't smile back, right? It's like, oh crap. And this last one, something in my room moves every time I blink. I'm getting tired, right? So it's like the person every time, this kind of reminds me of these little short horror or terror or scary movies on YouTube too. I don't remember the name of them, but I think there's one called The Box or something about a box where like you see the guy's face up to here and he's inside a box, which is like a deep black hole basically. And every time they stop looking at it, it like moves out of the box or something like that. That story has to do with water and like the lights. I think that the box or the person in the box, the monster or the thing, doesn't like the light, right? Um, yeah, there's another one really good, which is called, I think, The Curve. That one guaranteed will make your palms sweat for sure. I think it's just called like that, The Curve. It's like 5 minutes long, and it's not even like boo jump scare scary. It's just a girl who's like on this like curve, and the curve like descends into like a bottomless black hole pit, right? And she's just like struggling for dear life, like trying not to fall, right? For like 5 7 minutes, she's just doing that, and the whole time my palms are getting sweaty just thinking about it. I'm actually going to be using that later on in class to demonstrate anxiety. It's gonna be fun. um, but anyway, so there's a lot of fun stuff out there like that. Short styles, I like that format, like short, short movies, short stories. When we're talking about scary stuff, just compact it into. It's kind of an art too, if you think about it. Like, how are you going to tell a story in 2 sentences, right? Okay, so now we're gonna get into The Conjuring, which I watched. I actually watched two very interesting movies this weekend. Eternity, and The Conjuring, the last one so far in the timeline, which is called The Last Rites. It's from 2025. Um, so in this story, I'm going to be going through the story through moments, key moments in the movie, and then I'm also going to be talking or asking some meta questions or some meta narrative questions from like the movie and in general like supernatural scary stories or yeah, stories or movies. So the characters here in The Conjuring, we have Ed and Lorraine Warren, which I think are the main characters. See, the problem here also is that in this analysis, I'm not taking into consideration the other movies because I haven't watched them. I was actually watching this movie in class with some students, and that's the one we all chose. But I haven't really watched the other movies. I know of them, I know more or less what they're about, but it's like a whole universe, right? You got The Nun, you got Annabelle, you got The Conjuring. So the Conjuring Last Rites have Judy, no, have Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now it starts off with the birth of their daughter Judy, and Judy in this movie is, I guess that in the other movies she's been like a baby, a kid, and a teenager, and now she's like older. She's an adult. So her name is Judy, and Judy is Ed and Lorraine Warren's daughter. We also have the Smurls, who I guess is a new family being introduced here, and we have Father Gordon, who's a priest. So the first scene is interesting. Well, one of the first scenes, which is in the delivery room, Lorraine is having Judy, and as she's having Judy, see in the movie, if you watch the movie, I felt like there were two entities. There was like this person or this thing that was like all hooded up, and it had like a cape and everything. And then above it was like something whose hands were being shown, coming like from the, because there was like a barrier on the ceiling, right? So it was like there, like hanging from the ceiling. And what's interesting about that scene is that Judy, the baby, dies, right? And then something very interesting, Lorraine, because this happens later on to Judy too in the movie towards the end. Spoiler alert. Um, Judy also dies. And what's very interesting to me is the fact that Lorraine, her mother, starts saying like, "Oh, Father, oh God, help!" Right, Father, Father, like Father God. And you know, to me, it was like how much because there's a deep religious, not deep, but there are religious symbolisms in the Conjuring movies, especially in this one. You see the cross a lot. There's insinuation of, not insinuation, I mean, it's like completely there, the Father, the church, everything. And I was like, that's just weird because I don't know if you're asking the demon to help you or what. At one point, I thought the entity, this entity, the demon, which we later find out has been with Judy all her life, right? And it's actually the reason why Judy is alive. Like at one point, I asked my students, like, how bad was the demon then really if it like brought Judy to life, and basically thanks to it, I mean, it does torture Judy because I guess like Judy has these visions all the time, and then it's not so clear if Judy has those visions because of the demon that's in her, or because she's like her mother and she's like clairvoyant, or these people that can see things, they're just sensible, which I guess in the Nun I was told that one of the nuns, not the nun, or I guess it's the nun that eventually becomes possessed by the demon also. That nun has also this like sensibility of being able to detect things that aren't there, and the other nuns don't, right? So that's like kind of an enigma, if anybody wants to help me out, because I don't have the whole lore of the Conjuring universe. um but anyway, so there's that scene, and then there's a broken mirror. The broken mirror, I think, happens before that, but I didn't really understand why the mirror broke. The mirror becomes an essential piece, literally an essential piece of the movie, because it's like kind of where the demons live, or where their spirits are, right? We later find out the backstory of the demons, which I found that to be kind of making, when I feel like movies when they tell you, it reminded me a lot of The Haunting of Hill House. When, or no, not The Haunting, there's another one by the same creator, it's also on Netflix. But when you start to tell the story of the evil entity or whatever, like it used to be this guy or this girl that, this or that happened to, it humanizes them, right? It makes them less scary. So I think it's scarier not to know what the hell it is. And as soon as you start to kind of understand the background of the demons or where they come from, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I can, empathy. I can relate, or I can understand that, or I don't know. So anyway, another question that comes up here is, could Annabelle be a hallucination from Judy? Because I mean, cinematographically, or based on the recording of the movie, you have these scenes where it's kind of like, what? I mean, and I would even say in scary terms, because there's a moment, excuse me, where Annabelle becomes like big Annabelle, right? There's like she basically, you know, head to the ceiling, and she starts growing, and then she starts chasing Judy out of the room through the hallway, and then all of a sudden she's not there. And I was kind of like, how much, because you've seen movies where people are hallucinating, right? And the hallucinations are different from the scary jump scare moments, right? Where it's like jump scare and boom, or whatever, or I appear, but I'm gonna do something to you. But these like over the top theatrics, I feel like they may be pointing more to a hallucination. Now we're gonna get into that later on. This has to do with the church register, or the church documents, that very interestingly enough also are where like these supernatural reports go to, right? And the churches have like these logs or these registers, or this, or like all of this documented, which makes sense. And one of the things that the churches have to rule out is mental illness, right? So someone comes in, and it's like, I'm seeing things, I'm something scaring me, there's a demon in me, something like that, I'm possessed. And interestingly enough, the church has to kind of do a type of scientific background method check, like where they have to actually go through various steps to rule out mental illness. They have to recollect, or collect evidence, right? They have to collect, for example, medical records from the people, from the person, which makes sense. If you're over here like stating or saying that this is happening to you, well, let's rule out all of these other things then, so it can really be said that you are in fact like living that situation, which makes sense. So obviously it's a movie, it's based on real events, which interestingly enough also have to do with like the Amityville horror events, or the Amityville events with the Defoes, um, which I watched that movie a while ago. I think it was the second movie I watched, and also the 2005 version of it. But anyway, it's a possibility, right? Because again, the father, not Father Gordon, but Ed Ed Warren Ed Warren, funny enough, he reminded me of the father in Stranger Things, where like he's kind of just there and nothing really happens to him. I mean, he does participate in a lot of the drama and the chaos that's unfolding in the movie, but I think he never gets scared. I don't know if he gets scared or attacked by demons in other movies, but in this movie, he kind of doesn't. And it's mainly like the Smurls, the family that I mentioned, Judy and Lorraine. But Lorraine starts to get attacked by the demons like towards the end of the movie, right? So anyway, there's a funny scene. I felt like this movie kind of tried to work a little bit with humor also. Tony's proposal. Tony is uh the guy who becomes Judy's fiance. Like I said, Judy is an adult, so she's gonna get married. But before she gets asked to be married, Tony has to ask the parents, and that whole ordeal in the garage after ping pong is kind of funny, because he's like, the mother's like, yeah, you have our blessing, and the father's like, what? No, you guys aren't gonna get married. And then Judy comes in, and it's like, what are you guys doing? And the ring falls on the ground, and then Tony goes to get it up, but he's on his knees. And then Judy's just like, oh my God, yes, yes, yes. And he didn't even ask her. It's just kind of like funny, which I thought was kind of, again, it's like weapons. Like, why are you, I guess it works in the movie, but again, it's like, is it a comedy or is it a scary terror movie? Whatever. Okay, so back to the scary stuff. The Smurls and Judy, as the movie goes along, they start to have all of these experiences where they're being attacked by the demons, and those experiences are incrementing, right? They're going up, so they're starting to see more of those visions. And I was asking my students, like, why were they both having those experiences? Why were they having more of those visions? And I guess it's because of the mirror, right? As soon as the mirror shows up, and we named the main antagonist or the main demon because there's a demon behind another three demons, right? Lorraine even explains this. When she goes into the house, she like uses her abilities and she automatically figures out what's going on. And she's like, there are three demons, but behind those three demons, there's another demon, which we're gonna call the gray demon, because his hand, like you only see his hands, and his hands are like gray. And he's controlling these other three spirits, which the background story there, I guess we can get into now, is a husband who killed his wife and the wife's mother, right? So he kills his wife and his mother-in-law in that like house where the Smurls live, or that ground, right? Before they built houses or whatever. So that's the background story of these spirits that they see, and these people show up. Like you see the husband a couple of times. He looks really scary and nasty. You see, I think the mother-in-law who looks like a grandma, and I think you see, but I wasn't really sure. At one point, you see the wife, which I believe you see her in the scene where they're in the basement. I think it was Lorraine who's in the basement, or Judy, I don't remember. And she's like this, right? She's like, shh. And then, like, she gets hit on the side of the head with, like, a pick or whatever by the husband. I think that was the wife, but I'm not sure because, well, both of them look kind of like nasty and old. So, because they're meant to look scary. But anyway, so that happens, and they start to have more visions, right? Which again is kind of, I didn't really see the relationship between Judy's visions and the Smurl's visions and how they start to have more visions. But I do, because I do now, when it was explained to me that, well, Judy's possessed by the gray demon who's in the mirror, and the mirror is at the Smurls. So everyone's just having like all of these visions and jump scare scenes, right? Okay. Now another very impactful scene, I think maybe one of the most impactful scenes of the movie, very exorcist like, I don't know. It was Father Gordon's death. So he goes to the Smurl's house, and the whole movie is basically like the father is trying to help the Smurls, and the Father Gordon, knows that the Warrens can help. So he goes to the Warrens, and he's like, hey Warrens, can you guys help, these people that are coming to me to the church for these like supernatural things that are happening to them. And the Warrens are like, no, we're retired. They're like going to universities and giving lectures and talks, and the students are making fun of them, calling them Ghostbusters and things like that. Um, and one of the main thing for me that didn't make sense in the movie is that Ed Warren has a bad heart. So he gets told to lay off the meat and eat fish, and he's like, I'm not a fish person. And it's kind of funny. But anyway, he has a bad heart. And towards the end of the movie, he goes through like three or four different, like, strong, intense, emotional moments. At like 2 points, he becomes like, like he starts touching his heart, he lays down. But then, like, the thing that didn't make sense to me mainly in the movie was that he never even gets rushed to the hospital. Like, at the end of the movie, it's just like he's like, oh, like, I'm fine, and I'm gonna live happily ever after. There's a scene where he's dancing at his daughter's wedding with his wife, with Lorraine, and he's telling Lorraine how their future should be or will be. And I think maybe there's an insinuation there that he may die, soon, and he won't get to live that out with, because there's even a point where he's saying our kids are gonna visit us or something like that. And I'm like, dude, I can see your kids. I can see Judy, your daughter's kids, coming to visit you maybe in like 10 years or whatever, that when they're 9, 8, whatever. But their kids, it's like, bro, you're not gonna live like you have a bad heart, like what are you talking about? But anyway, I felt like that was kind of like a Deo ex machina type of thing, where it was like, so are you sick or are you not? Like, make your mind up, because you're facing all of these intense things, and your heart's not going bad after you had like a. And I guess in real life, he did die of a stroke, right? A student was telling me that the end was like changed, because at the end of this movie, the case is solved, right? Because the Warrens solve cases, so they are kind of like the Ghostbusters. Um, which I like that about the movie. It has like an academic, instructive, formative, university vibe to it. Well, not vibe, but it does have those, like, even at the end of the movie, you even get the scene where like the son-in-law, or Judy's husband, is now teaching like the next generations about the supernatural. They make a comment where they say that the scientific community doesn't accept this, where nowadays we're talking about tolerance to everything and inclusion. So what if there are people that are having these experiences, even if you don't believe in ghosts like myself, or things, or supernatural things, but some people are having these things, you should at least listen to them. No, it's kind of like the Freud ideology of these people are just crazy, and Freud was like, let me listen to them, and that's how therapy was born. So anyway, I felt like it was an interesting take. Again, these topics aren't really, they have never been my cup of tea. Psychopathy, scary movies, but I could get a little bit behind it. I was like, okay, fair enough. There are some things here worth analyzing. So anyway, back to Father Gordon's death. His whole death. So he like, again, he's trying to convince the Warrens to help the Smurls. The Warrens are like, no, we're retired, we're done with all that, we've been working for 20, 30 years, and we're good. And he goes to the Smurl's house, and he throws holy water all over the house. But then in the basement specifically, the holy water starts to evaporate. So I guess that's a criteria that the fathers or the priests use. And he goes to Pennsylvania to like get the big guns. I guess it's not really clear what his mission is, but I do know he's getting help. Right? It's clear that he can handle, or he can't do that on his own, because he tells one of the Smurls, a family member, like I'm going to go get help. I'm going to go tell the church. And when he goes to get help at the offices of the church, I guess, or wherever he's at, he ends up like having visions, and he ends up killing himself ultimately, right? Which is kind of like crazy if you think about it. It's very symbolic, because he's literally trying to fight off the evil spirit, or the demon, which I guess was the gray demon. Where I asked students, like, how was it possible that the gray demon was able to kill Father Gordon, like telekinetically, or like, and I guess it's because it just kind of did it, like went with him or something like that, because I guess Gray Demon knew that Father Gordon would bring the big guns and probably take him out, which later on we're going to get into a scene where it's not very clear to me why Judy convinces her parents to stay, since the gray demon doesn't want to be destroyed. And if Judy is there and the gray demon is in Judy, shouldn't Judy actually be trying to convince her parents to leave and not help the Smurls? But anyway, so Father Gordon dies. He ties like a cable around his neck and throws himself off a balcony. Very gruesome scene. And yeah, again, he's trying to fight off like the demon, and his cross sets on fire. So I felt like it was a physical death, but it was also a very psychological death, because he kills himself. It's not like the demon like killed them or whatever, or pushed them out of the window, like, like the gray demon here like possesses him, it can be said, and then he makes him like, based on belief. It's like a very psychological death. And it has a bigger impact because he's a father, he's a believer of God, right? So it's like, I think after that scene everybody was like quiet. It was like, what? Like, the impact of that was, I think, one of the highlights of the movie. Okay, anyway, now the Warrens decide, and I guess it was necessary if you talk about a yeah, like based on the narrative, it was necessary for him to die. So then, because the Warrens are alerted, they're told because they're friends with Father Gordon that the father died, and they're like, whoa, like, and then you got the Smurls who need help, and then Judy ends up at the Smurls house for some reason. I was kind of like, it reminded me of that meme of, Dewey, that isn't your family. Like, Judy's at the Smurls, like, how the hell did she get there? She eventually explains that she's there um because she was investigating Father Gordon's death, and that was the house he was at before he died, or the last house he had been at, which is true. um, so she's there, and then the parents arrive there. There's like cameramen outside, news media outlets outside. It's like a big deal now because the devil is in that city or whatever, and they're making a big fuss of it. And the Warrens are basically there just to get Judy, and they're like, Judy, let's go. Like, we need to go. And then the Smurls are like, bro, help us. And they're like, no, sorry, we're leaving. And then Judy's the one that gets like, stop. Like, we need to help these people, like, you guys help people, like, whatever. And then they end up deciding to help. And I was like, it wasn't very clear to me why the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine specifically, decide to help the Smurls after they said they were retired and everything. Lorraine just keeps saying like, this feels different, this feels different. And I guess it wasn't that different from before. I guess the different thing here was that the demon was in her daughter, right? But then again, Annabelle is in her, or no, I think there's a little girl in Annabelle. That's what I was told from that like car accident where the little girl dies with the doll or something like that. But anyway, Annabelle is like the thing that torments Judy. But then she has another problem, which I guess, I don't know if that's like just recent or that's always been there, which is the fact that she has that like gray demon in her, right? Which again, to me, it doesn't make sense that I'm like thinking, I think of it this way. I think of it this way. Like, if the gray demon is in Judy, and the gray demon actually went so far as to kill Father Gordon, not to bring in the big guns and take out like his whole posse of spirits and demons of the three people that are there, why would he why would he not do something to get the Warrens out of the house, knowing that the Warrens can and do eventually end up, eliminating like the gray demon and the father, the husband, well, the husband, the wife, and the mother-in-law, right? The other three demon spirits. So I was like, what? Like, are you even in there, gray demon? Like, or did you possess like Judy to a certain extent, which I'm not sure, but did you possess her to like tell the Warrens to stay so then you can take them out? Because at the end it's kind of solved, like, another like Deus ex machina, like they just, it's like the power of love, and then they all put their, it's like, don't be afraid of that which scares you, and put your hands on the mirror, and the family will overcome everything. And then they eventually just end up like killing the demons, or I wasn't really sure what happens at the end, but good triumphs, and everyone lives happily ever after. So I was kind of like, and again, I was told by a student that that's not what happened in real life. In real life, it was a case, that last case was the last case that could not be solved, right? But it reminds me of the movie Eternity, because Eternity ends up on a happy note, which, after she escapes from the Eternity, if you watch Eternity, you'll know what I'm talking about, but she escapes Eternity. And to me, it doesn't make sense that then she's able to live happily ever after in another Eternity with her husband from life, well, for her long-term husband. And that doesn't make sense to me. It would have made more sense if she went into the void with her husband and they just spent the rest of eternity in the void, right? But see, the thing about those type of endings is that they're kind of negative, they're kind of bleak, they're kind of like what, but I feel like they're more interesting, right? They're rawer, they're realer. I don't know, because the ending of Last Rites is kind of like, like okay, whatever. So anyway, another big question here is how did the mirror get in the attic? Because the mirror gets taken out. Like the Smurl family members take out the mirror because the mirror is doing crazy shit, crazy things. So then they take out the mirror, they throw it in the trash, and then the trash dumpster, the trash truck crushes the mirror, and then eventually it just shows up in the attic again. So I was like, how did it end up back in the attic? Right? And no one could answer that. So I was just like, okay, whatever. Okay. And the last thing was that the demon, interestingly enough, never actually left Judy. So the demon has been in Judy since she was a baby, since she came back to life. And Judy, I was asking, like, why did the demon stay in Judy for that long? And I guess they said because they wanted the gray demon wanted Judy as an adult, so then he could cross over, very like Freddy Krueger, cross over into the real world and then actually start doing things in the real world. But he needed, or the gray demon needed Judy to be an adult, so then he could start doing these things. Which, like, okay, I haven't watched the movies where Judy's a little kid or a teenager or whatever, but if you're trying to get her to be an adult, maybe you shouldn't be messing around, and, and potentially getting yourself exercised out of the body, right? Like you should just wait patiently until she's an adult and then just attack and have a plan, right? Um, but yeah, I don't know if it was just recently that they came up with this idea for the movie, or if this was something that's been in the story since the beginning, which I think it has been, maybe because this story, again, it's based on real events, and everything's like documented and whatever. So it's so everybody knows what happens, I guess. Um, so yeah, that's the case with Judy from her being a baby. Oh yeah, and she dies because, yeah, and then that doesn't make sense either because like Judy gets possessed by the gray demon, I guess, and she goes and kills herself, right? Like she hangs herself and she dies again momentarily. That's the second time she died because she died when she was a baby. She dies again as an adult, but then again she comes back to life, and the mother, like right before she comes back to life, the mother is like, "Oh, Father, oh God, please help, Father." And then like she comes back to life after her father does like CPR on her as an adult. So I was like, is she possessed? Is she still possessed by the demon? Is the demon the thing that brought her back to life? And if it is, why did you kill yourself? Like, what? That doesn't make sense, man. Are you just an agent of chaos then? I don't know. Okay, so now we'll get into the meta questions. These are kind of related to the movie, but also very general. Why do ghosts or supernatural entities only attack or scare during night or when people are alone or vulnerable? See, whether it's a story that is in a movie or in a book or whatever, like the thing that's interesting to me is like, because I see these scenes in the movie, right, where like the Smurls are a family, and there's kids running around, and there are a lot of scenes where I think some of them are on the phone, and it's like, okay, if you're a demon or a supernatural entity, why are you not attacking like just randomly? Why are you waiting till it's night? Why are you waiting until people are alone and vulnerable? Right? Like if your mission, like, to me this sounds like demons or supernatural entities have an understanding or some type of intuition or criteria on how to optimally scare people. And then it's like, well, if you have that criteria, like, is it like a psychopath, like you're just using that for your own benefit, or are you actually like human, or like, to me it doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's like if you're a demon and your mission's to attack, why don't you just attack whenever, right? Like, why do you wait? Are you that patient? How patient are ghosts? And I'm talking about I can't get that word right, but like based on a narrative structure or narratively. um so yeah, that's something that to me is like, why can't you just attack in the day, or when there's a bunch of people, just go in there and do your thing. Like, why do you have to wait? Another question is, can we assume that the characters are never bothered, scared, or attacked by the supernatural entities when they are off screen? So in the movie, I really liked it, that, and I think it exemplifies what a scary movie should be in these terms. You have the people doing random, every not random but everyday things, like washing the dishes, talking on the phone, cleaning up your room, playing with a doll. Like, you just have all of these like really normal things that people are doing. And when they're doing these things, like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, like, that's when the scary thing happens, right? The jump scares. Which I think was good, because it exemplifies how anything ordinary can be turned scary. But again, it's usually at nighttime, or they're usually alone, right? And it's like, like, why can't, like, for me, I would like to see more movies where they break away from that trope of it has to be night or they have to be alone, right? Well, like, why can't they just be having like a like lunch, like a picnic, and all of a sudden they get scared, and it's like, like, I feel like that would be interesting to see, right? Because again, it's kind of like a cliche to always wait until it's night and wait until they're alone. Um, but then, the Smurls are being attacked, Judy's being attacked, and it's like we always get to see that. So every scene that you see, like, the mother's coming down with the laundry basket, she's coming down the stairs with the laundry basket, she goes into the laundry room, or she goes downstairs into the laundry room, and something's gonna happen, because you're like, why am I watching this random everyday common scene of this person doing some everyday household chore, right? It's because obviously something's about to happen, right? So what about what about things not happening when they're supposed to happen on screen? Or what about scary things happening off screen, right? Now, there's a very interesting element to this movie, which is the mother-in-law Smurl. No, not mother-in-law. I think Grandma Smurl. I got her name somewhere here, because I was like, what is the, well, Dawn gets attacked. She starts spitting out, um she starts coughing up like pieces of broken mirror, and she vomits blood. It's pretty disgusting. But Mary Smurl, which is the grandmother, we don't see her. I looked up the scene, and it's not, I thought it was like a deleted scene, but we get told later on that Mary Smurl, grandmother Smurl, fell down the stairs, right? So the Smurls are being attacked. Everyone's being attacked, at random points, and they're being scared and whatever. They need help from the Warrens. Um, and Mary Smurl's, Grandma Smurl, I'm gonna call her Grandma Smurl. I don't know if it's Grandma or someone or aunt or something, but Grandma Smurl falls down the stairs. She gets taken away to the hospital, and she's not there for the climax at the end, for the chaotic scene. So I was like, that's so interesting, because, okay, if Grandma Smurl fell down the stairs off screen and it was due to a supernatural entity, that's awesome, because again, we don't have to see all of these attacks, right? Now, what's interesting is that we don't know. We don't know if she fell because of the supernatural entities that were there, right? The husband, the wife, the mother-in-law, the gray demon, or if she fell because it was an accident, right? Which is interesting, because if it was an accident, then that will increase the paranoia in everybody. So that's kind of like the example there. Mother-in-law Smurl falls down the stairs off screen. Now, the other thing was, do churches document or register supernatural events? And the answer is yes. They have, again, excuse me, like I mentioned, the churches have to do like this study of, they have to eliminate mental illness. They have to do like all of these things to really investigate. And I feel like that's so interesting because, again, like from an academic standpoint, I never thought about that. Um, but I think about this idea of just like going into your nearest church and asking for like documents on supernatural reports in your community. Like that would be kind of cool. If I don't know if the general public, if the open public has access to that, but I feel like it would be interesting, right? Like to see what the church has, because one thing I was learning about this is that it's not all like one compiled system of information. Like each church has its own records, and the big church just lets that be, right? So, yeah, go to your local church if you can and ask for supernatural reports. Okay, another question was Dawn hurt? Now, again, I spoke on Dawn just now, and I said how she vomits broken glass, and but then she's like fine, and I was like, wait, so was she hurt like physically, or was it only like symbolic, metaphysical, right? And this is the question: when do supernatural entities cross over from the metaphysical, symbolic world to the physical world to hurt? See, it's not clear, and that's kind of like where I'm trying to pinpoint like what's really happening with these supernatural entities in movies, right? Where they're like hurting you. I understand they hurt you psychologically, of course, symbolically, with the whole cross upside down, with all of these like symbolic. It's very metaphysical, actually, the way that they scare you. Um, I think about the two eyes. There's also an interesting YouTube movie on that, short movie about, I think it's something about God, and it's like two eyes, and it's like a scary figure, and it's like God, but you see these two eyes, and then in the movie you also see the two eyes, um, and that's interesting. So there's a lot of symbolism, right? It's loaded with symbolism, which is very interesting. The relationship between the scary stuff and the symbolism, right? How like the symbolism and metaphysical, we know, can influence millions. Think of brands, marketing, things like that. So ideologies, right? So related to how to scare people, it's like it's a potent weapon. um, but okay, so again, this reminded me of Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, because Freddy Krueger is a metaphysical entity, right? He's in your dreams, but then he manages to cross over, and in that's why I like the Freddy Krueger movies. It's clear that his objective is to cross over to the physical world so that he can do harm in the physical world. But what's not clear about the Conjuring Last Rites is whether these entities operate or don't on the physical world, right? Like there are moments where the husband with an axe or his pick wants to like hurt the Smurls, and they're saved just in time when the family arrives or whatever. But it's like, could they have hurt, or do they not have the power yet to cross into the physical world? Because again, if we go back to the idea of all of these are hallucinations, the person can be hallucinating up until the point when the family arrives, and then it's like, oh, you guys just saved me, you're here in the nick of time, like the guy was about to start axing me away or whatever. But it's really the fact that it was all in their head, right? It's kind of like, what is this idea? There's a name for it in psychoanalysis, where you hear the alarm clock before the alarm clock goes off, or you hear a noise in your sleep before it happens in time, right? And it's like maybe it could be some phenomenon like that. Um, but yeah, anyway, so it's not clear whether they just want to operate. See, to me, Gray Demon's whole plan here is just kind of like what. uh but yeah, anyway, there's a new movie coming out. I guess it's a prequel, so it's not really like the last of the thing, but it's called The Conjuring First Communion in 2027. It's a prequel. They're saying since the First Communion is based on children from 6 to 7 when they do their first communion in Catholic settings or whatever. It may have to do with a possession of a kid or something like that. I've seen lately that there are a lot of kids rising from the series adolescent to the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. There's like child actors right now that are starting to kind of like gain popularity, right? So could be. Anyway, the last thing I'm going to talk about is hyperbole. And hyperbole is when you exaggerate or show intense emotion, but not meant to be taken literally, and in formal contexts, it could cause confusion. But I promote the tolerance towards it. Now, hyperbole can get you in a lot of trouble because when you're arguing, you will exaggerate things. So, just to get your point across, so you may say things like, I don't know, capitalism is dead, man. And it's like you're not really trying to say that. What you're actually trying to say, see, and logic speaks to this. You have to be logical to argue, right? You can't exaggerate because then that's just rhetoric. That's just emotional. That's just appealing to emotion. So what you need to do is say things like, I feel like in some ways capitalism has been declining in the past few years, especially in the industrial complex or something, right? So you have to be like more specific and less like visceral or emotional. But where I want to promote its tolerance is in the opening of arguments, right? Now, I think it is different if someone says something like, everyone is evil, right? And then you get questioned and you say, well, do you mean everyone all the time or just some people sometimes? And you could say, no, I mean like sometimes under the right circumstances, and you redefine your argument. You make it, you polish it, you make it more digestible for people. You make it truer, right? You make it more valid logically. That's different than saying, no, I mean everyone is evil all the time, right? And then that person becomes like that type of right wing conservative extremist where it's like, I'm right, you're wrong, and I just keep repeating the same thing. All people are bad all the time, and that's different because that is dogmatic, right? And that's using hyperbole, but that's not using hyperbole like to develop the idea further or to fine tune it, right? That's just being stubborn, right? So again, if you're going to use hyperbole as an initial way of speaking or as an introduction, I think it's valid, and I think people shouldn't like um bring it down or shut it down, right? I think people should kind of be like, okay, well, explain that further, right? Like, I want to hear you, right? Because a lot of that can get misinterpreted, and like it says here, in formal context, it can cause confusion because if you're being very technical and straightforward and you're being specific about things and being very logical, and then you use hyperbole, it may confuse people like, what? But what I'm seeking there or promoting, excuse me, then is tolerance to that. And maybe instead of attacking and shutting it down, more of this attitude of like curiosity, like how do you mean? What do you mean? Can you elaborate further? Can you expand that idea? Right? To see if the person is really saying what they're trying to say. Because see, I use hyperbole a lot and I use it to get people's attention, to exaggerate emotionally. Like, I'm trying to get you to listen to me, right? And I'm not going to get you to listen to me by being specific or soft or very logical because you're just going to be like, oh, yeah, well, some people are sometime, some of the time, sometimes, whatever. No, like, I'm going to be like, always, never, black or white, this, that, right? Good or bad. So you could be like, wait a minute, like, is it all, and then I can get your attention, right? So it's like a communication device, sort of say. So yeah, anyway, I thought I'd talk a little bit about hyperbole. It's a very interesting topic. I may elaborate on that further as time goes by. Check out the Conjuring Last Rites if you haven't, and let me know what you think about all this info, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.